do you reside on? We wanted to welcome you today to our webinar on Intranets Evolve, Where Are You in Your Social Journey? And this is a continuation of our Intranets Evolve series that we started in December. And we have with us today Joel Oleson from ViewDo Labs, who is going to allow us the opportunity to ask him some questions and to speak more about how you can evolve in your social journey. So Joel, welcome, and would you like to give us a brief introduction?
Sure. It's great to connect with everybody here, and great to be on with the portal. We're using the hashtag #PortalView here. Anyway, you could say I've been working with SharePoint since the early days, and even with Yammer, even since before Microsoft acquired it. And enterprise social has actually been a big passion of mine. And you could also say that I love to travel. I have a number of things planned for this spring as far as social goes. Heading up to Montreal SharePoint Saturday in just a couple weeks. I'm running the Utah SharePoint Saturday coming up on February 1st, and I'll be doing a SharePoint Saturday in Jamaica, which is kind of fun, and the European SharePoint Conference, the big SharePoint Conference in Las Vegas. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be out there. Hope to connect with many of you on the call at a number of those conferences.
Great, thank you. Well, the Jamaica SharePoint Saturday sounds like one I want to register for.
It should be a lot of fun.
So I'm very pleased to have Joel join us this afternoon. And Joel is an endless source of information as well as experience with regard to SharePoint, with regard to social and strategizing around your social journey. And so we're really excited today to have him and to discuss a bit more about how to strategize and what next steps you need to take in your social journey. So just a quick introduction from me. I'm Jill Hannemann. I am with Portal Solutions, and at Portal I am the Director of Advisory Services. And so essentially what that means here for us is I work with a lot of clients on a lot of the strategy engagements in leveraging SharePoint as an information management platform, and how to embrace and start leveraging some of the newer features within the Microsoft suite of products, and how that can help with corporate intranets, with social connections, social building, social enterprise, as well as a lot more regulatory and compliant information management needs around records and e-discovery and classification. So I have a very strong interest in these areas as well, and enterprise social, along with Joel. And am also a speaker at various SharePoint Saturdays and other conferences more around information management, information architecture, and taxonomy. And so I also love to travel. Don't have quite as busy of a schedule as Joel for travel, but when I do get the chance, I like to go to Italy. So just before we begin and start talking a little bit more about your social journey, where you are, where to go, and what next steps you should take, we wanted to just share a bit about who both of our companies are. So with regard to Portal Solutions, we've been in business for 10+ years. We have also completed over 200 SharePoint implementations. And in that mix, we've also done a good dozen Office 365 implementations as well for SharePoint Online. We are structured around 4 different practice areas, really encapsulating the full life cycle of a SharePoint implementation, a SharePoint project. So from the strategy and planning to the branding and user experience, we also address technical design and implementation and customization, as well as user adoption concerns and change management. So we've been selected 3 times for the SharePoint Early Adopter Program, and last but not least, we are located in 2 primary areas. We have an office up in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am coming to you from our office in the Washington, D.C. area. And so with that, Joel, I'm going to pass it back over to you to say a few words about ViewDo.
Yeah, so ViewDo Labs is all about enterprise social and helping you better understand where you're at through social analytics and being able to give you really information about helping you understand adoption, but also compliance and keyword monitoring and getting people the tools that they need to really be able to make your enterprise social flourish. It works with both the Yammer freemium tool as well as enterprise, and in a number of cases helps people get from the freemium flavor to the enterprise by being able to help the business get on board with what's happening inside of enterprise social. And as well, I'm excited to say that we're very close on having some offerings around Chatter, and as well, there's a relay service for SharePoint. And what that gives you is the ability to see side by side what's going on in Yammer, what's going on in SharePoint, from that perspective of who are your influencers and what's adoption look like.
Okay, so we are going to run this webinar in a Q&A kind of format. And so in the next couple slides that we're going to share with you throughout the presentation, we've got some statistics, we've got some tips, we have some conversation starters to discuss exploring your social journey. And I'm going to be asking Joel a couple questions that I have for him about his experience and recommendations that he can make to all of us as far as how to structure and strategize our journeys. But we want to keep this dialogue interactive. And it shouldn't just be me asking Joel questions. We want to hear from all of you. So you can see at the top of the slide, we have a hashtag, PortalView. And we've got some webinar admins who are checking that feed and will be parlaying any questions that you ask us through the Twitter feed over to me, and we'll be sure to ask Joel throughout the conversation. So please get involved in the dialogue, talk to us. And I know that Joel last webinar sent out a couple tweets live while we were doing the conversation. So feel free to interact with us. It's exactly how we want this to go. We want to be able to make sure your questions get answered. And then finally, we've got a couple questions for you. So throughout the presentation, we are going to introduce a couple polls to try to get some of your feedback to help enrich the experience. And we'll be able to share the results of that poll real time so that you can see some of the demographic of the other listeners who are also attending this webinar. So with that, we're going to dive right in, and we're going to start talking about why enterprise social networks. And so you'll see in the abbreviation ESN. So we use the abbreviation ESN throughout the presentation, but just so that you all know, ESN is Enterprise Social Intranets or Networks. And so we're going to start off with this statement that says satisfaction levels are higher than both email and instant messaging for ESNs. And I find that to be really surprising. And so, you know, I really want to ask you, Joel, how do you manage that change initially for users who really are wedded to email, and where have you seen these satisfaction levels trending?
It is a big change for a lot of people. I think the reason why we get higher satisfaction with enterprise social is the fact that there's a lot more sharing that happens. It's a lot more open and transparent in terms of communication, but also the knowledge capture that happens, that ability to look back on, you know, same questions somebody new might have, now they've got access to that, where with email or instant messaging, those conversations are really, while they're immediate and you know, somewhat real time, the downside to that is that's knowledge that's lost. And so you're really able to capture more of that through an enterprise social network. Understanding at the same time, people are concerned about security, so some conversations do have to happen in private groups. But again, if that was a conversation over email, they get lost in inboxes and archived off depending on corporate policies, and essentially those conversations are gone. No knowledge capture, no history, and so on.
And kind of further to this, how important do you view employee engagement? Is this a really critical starting piece?
Yeah. I think that you could say with technology has been kind of the glue to help educate the employees and help them navigate to the tools that are available to them. And the intranets themselves have been traditionally portals, and very, very much there's a few set of people who are trying to answer questions and trying to link up to apps that can address the employee's needs. Now you've got a situation where it's less about building custom solutions and more about connecting individuals and building an environment where ideas can be shared and where people can feel safe asking questions and connecting experts and so on.
Okay, I think that's all really critical to how you start to evolve in leveraging and gaining success and adoption through ESNs. So the next slide we actually have is one from ViewDo, and it really discusses more about how to measure your own social maturity level. And so perhaps you can talk us through this methodology.
Yeah. So this is evolving, and this is actually something that my team have kind of worked on mutually together. It's this idea that there is a spectrum, and that if we can recognize where we're at, then we can understand better what the next steps are, and we can relate to others who may be also in the same step. So this maturity spectrum, this maturity framework essentially has been put out there to help people who are going through this to be able to recognize where they're at. And just kind of walking through these, experimenting is really that it's often somebody in the business, it may be even IT, but for the most part it's somebody who's wanting they've heard things like what we're talking about now, and they want to try things out. It's amazing how many Yammer chatter are out there, even in parallel, where they're essentially in this experimental phase where it's under the radar, it's from some free software, IT really isn't managing it, which is obviously a risk, but it's this experimenting phase of trying to bring up a pilot, trying to get feedback, trying to engage with other people and see if they can really get the business value out of the platform. And I'll tell you right now, there's many, many companies who are in this experimenting phase and don't even realize it. This is definitely under the radar. It's shadow IT often. It's the business saying, we ought to try this stuff out. Moving into that expanding phase, expanding is more about that proof of concept has been completed. And some department wants to adopt it. They want to use it. So from a Yammer perspective, it may be that they're paying for premium for some subset of users. It could be that expanding itself is where it's being rolled out to a department or to a group, but it's got enough validation that it doesn't have to fly under the radar anymore. It doesn't have to necessarily be considered a pilot. Now it's not everywhere. That's later on. And the embracing part of it is where it's no longer some guy's idea or some department's doing this. Now we're actually seeing further adoption. We're seeing multiple departments looking and saying, wouldn't this be a great way for us to cross-group collaborate? Or let's get these two parts of the organization, let's get project management and engineering talking to each other and sharing more around the specs. Let's get these two locations sharing information. So that embracing phase really is you're really starting to understand what are some of the business processes, what are some of those ways you can take advantage of the technology, and really starting to place it squarely within the business. And so a lot of the exciting things happen from a business perspective in that embracing phase. And everywhere is where now you no longer have to always be up against the wall when someone says, why are we doing enterprise social? It's really accepted by the business. It essentially is sanctioned. It's above bar, security, legal. There's monitoring. There's processes. There's it's basically from top to bottom. Now we see it as a well-governed environment, and you know, governed. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just from a perspective of you're not going to get screamed at, but as well, all departments can now take advantage of the technology.
So we do have a question from one of our listeners. It says, trust appears to be critical in being able to evolve in this process through the spectrum. And trust between the platform, between leadership, et cetera. Yep. Are we all interpreting that correctly?
I totally agree. In fact, you'll see later on in one of my slides, I use the word trust. Yeah, I think that what we try and do is there's so many social things that are already happening out there, from what's happening on LinkedIn in groups to what happens on Facebook and what's happening in you know, various consumer technologies that we all participate in. And what's interesting is how some businesses that don't have a platform, they're finding that their employees are using those tools to better communicate with people on the road, or with partners, or with customers, and so on. And some of those are okay, but a lot of those, there's a lot of concern about, man, that data, we don't really own that data. And there's definitely a lot of conversations about cloud as well, Yammer being cloud only, and a lot of other technologies like Jive where it's cloud by default, but you've really got to jump through a number of hoops if you're serious about doing Jive on premise. And from my perspective, it seems like social may be the first cloud application that many organizations actually use and embrace, by virtue of the services it brings and the value add of not having to manage this infrastructure and the storage, and it being something that the business wants to run and own. Now, that idea of going from just experimenting to expanding, yeah, there's a level of endorsement that happens with department heads. There's to get into everywhere, you've got to have executive leadership that are definitely on board with this platform. As it works its way up, you're getting more and more people on board from a trust perspective. And there's also that trust but verify. And so from a governance perspective, which is definitely something we can talk a little bit later on, is you do need these ambassadors, these people from within the business that help enforce policies. And defining policies really should be happening very early on in that experimenting phase of how are we going to roll this out? How are we going to gain trust from the business? Let's bring security in. Let's bring legal in. Let's come up with some policies that address some of these concerns so that the conversations are the level of conversations that we're looking for.
And so I think that culture really has a strong role in these conversations and in the building trust. Have you seen, could you give us some examples of some of the different types of cultures perhaps you've seen, and how they've looked to go through experimenting, expanding, embracing?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I just late last year I was at a SharePoint conference in Slovenia, and I was talking about social, just one of my topics I like to talk about. And Branka, who runs the event there, she says, we need to back up with this crowd. we need to make sure that people even understand the business value, because they're freaked out about social, and they're freaked out about what it means and how it's very counterculture to these kind of these attitudes of very hierarchical organizations. And the idea of empowering the end user employee is definitely something that many companies are worried about. What if we give that person a voice who's on the floor? What is that going to do? And it's going to create a megaphone. It's going to create an amplifier. And so in some cultures, those people don't have a voice. And so what's interesting is just taking a Yammer example of Red Robin, how in their organization, they really wanted to tap into the minds of the people who were on the floor, those people who were serving the burgers, and they had little contests on Yammer to come up with the best recipe for the best burgers, and just as a little campaign on Yammer to try and get those people involved in the conversation. And these are people that didn't have any Active Directory accounts. These are people that didn't have a lot of structure inside of an organization where they sit in front of a PC. So when you look at it from that perspective of this can be a very empowering conversation, there are some cultures where it's like, no, we don't want to hear from the people at the bottom of the chain. You talk about a place like Taco Bell or something. It's like, well, how would they use social? These people really are never in front of machines. Well, if you look about it from a perspective of turnover, and the Yum brands are trying to engage their employees and trying to create a little bit of loyalty so that they don't have the turnover. How can you look at some of these things and say, we're going to increase our quality by educating our employees, by getting them better access to information, but also we're going to get these, one Taco Bell shop from another one, the only person who may ever compare notes might be the manager. And now you can actually have people who have similar jobs being able to compare notes. So that's really very empowering from that perspective of what really happens inside the business when you start enabling these types of things. Okay. And one last thing on this slide. All those things you see across the goal setting and the culture and adoption, engagement, and measurement, what we find is those are things you really need to be looking at from the perspective of each of these levels across the spectrum. You need to have a set of goals for each of these. You really need to be looking at the culture and embracing this transformation that's going to happen within the organization and understanding what does that mean and making sure you're not getting the cart ahead of the horse.
So what we'd like to do now actually is I'm launching a poll to all of you, and we'd like to understand where you are in the social maturity spectrum. So we have the 4 options for experimenting, expanding, embracing, everywhere. And so if you could all take a few minutes to give us a vote, that would be very helpful, and we'll take a look at the results in a few minutes. So focusing a little bit more on adoption and participation inequality, I think this really raises the question of how are we measuring success?
Yeah, and I think that's a really key criteria. Is a lot of people would say you can't simply look at metrics and say that you're successful, and I totally agree with that. The ViewDo approach of helping arm you with your adoption statistics and helping you understand who your leaders are across your leaderboard can definitely help you better connect with your employees and help you use that as a baseline of how many people did we have engaging prior. And one of the most recent features is being able to do these custom date ranges. So that idea of being able to compare a previous time and understanding what happened during that previous time, and then choosing another date range and saying what were the top conversations, and being able to compare those conversations, compare the the people who are leading and understanding, are these all IT people? Is this all one department, or are we truly seeing conversations that are happening across the enterprise?
Okay, so I'm going to just take a quick minute and share the results. So we can now see about 55% of you all are experimenting, 17% are in the expanding phase, and then 21% embracing, and 6% everywhere. So very interesting feedback. We really do have a good mix of folks who are in different places within the spectrum.
Yeah, and I would say one comment on that is this definitely reflects my perspective of there's a lot of people, and really it's a far majority that are really in that experimenting phase. So it's a great opportunity to connect people who are going through this, because if you're really in that experimenting phase, you really want to learn the success from other people and being able to understand what works well, and especially when we talk about things like success. Well, the way that one company may measure success could be completely different from the way another one would. But at the same time, there could be some best practices shared, like on how you come up with your ambassador program or Yam Jams and things like this. How do you get executives involved? Being able to share those things on like the YCN, the Yammer Customer Network, but also within the community, across Twitter or in ESN chat or different things like that, can help us understand, is there a role for the community manager, as an example? I think that's a fascinating question of how involved is IT? There's a lot of differences from organization to organization when you start talking about how a social is rolling out and the success is happening.
Okay, so we actually have another question from one of the folks on the webinar. So the question is, we are looking at adding services like Jive to our SharePoint 2010 environment. Should we wait until we upgrade to SharePoint 2013?
I think that a lot of people will find that the Yammer deployment versus SharePoint deployment really they don't have to go hand in hand. They can even stagger. In fact, one very compelling story I heard recently was there was a consolidation. A number of companies kind of merged together. Each of them had their own SharePoint environment. They all had their own processes for doing things. But they found very little collaboration happening between these new companies other than at the executive level. So they thought, well, how can we help form conversations and help these new employees connect with each other? And some of these really have been working there for a long, long time. So how do we help them get on the same page and start working together? And they decided they were going to use Yammer to help bring the spectrum across a number of different SharePoint environments. And I thought that's brilliant. Yammer can really be the social glue between these various SharePoint environments. And as things like Active Directory get figured out and mailboxes and domain moves and things like that, Yammer being in the cloud can really simplify those types of deployments, and can definitely make it, the deployment itself is so accelerated that it's more about culture than it is about technology. And it's kind of magical being able to get people together and start conversations, but in that experimenting phase, you do want to come out of there with some policies. And even in an environment like that, you do want to make sure your ducks in a row as you come up with some plans to make to roll things out broader.
So I think further to that thought, how important is it for organizations, either in the experimenting or expanding phase, to define what collaboration means to them, as well as how do you avoid any user confusion with the tools and technology, so that they understand they should use news feed for this particular function. So what advice would you give?
And I think I do speak a little bit to that a little bit later in terms of being able to compare SharePoint and your enterprise social network. But there's really a difference between structured content and unstructured content. And as you bring up an enterprise social network, you've really brought up some very loose ad hoc collaboration, where before we used to think of SharePoint as being extremely ad hoc collaboration. Now it actually moves SharePoint over to the right, where it's more structured than Yammer is. And it ends up being that glue that crosses departments and teams, and just like search does, essentially. But it creates this ability to connect people that you otherwise previously wouldn't get. Now, when you say, how does an employee know which tool they should be using? Do I use a discussion group in SharePoint, or do I do this on a list, or do I do this in the enterprise social network? I think it comes back to culture and being able to decide as a corporation what are the right tools for the right purposes, because you don't want to add a lot of confusion. But these days, companies don't have to say, this is when you use your cell phone, this is when you use your desk phone. A lot of that happens organically, and the best practices themselves kind of form organically, and that's okay. And I think that's where some people start to get ahead of themselves, as they think they have to dictate all of this stuff up front, where some departments are going to come up with ways of leveraging the enterprise social network in ways that the people who are running it may never have thought of. And we want these things to grow and to evolve.
So we are going to transition a little bit to talking a little bit more specifically about Yammer, but we did want to be sure to say that the conversation is not limited to Yammer. Feel free to ask questions about any of the other social platforms or the social platform that you're considering. So here we have a couple of statistics around how quickly Yammer is growing. Joel, could you give us some insight?
Yeah, I think one thing to point out is that a lot of people kind of wondered, when Yammer got acquired by Microsoft, would there be a dip in people that had been using that platform because it wasn't Microsoft? Even in a company I worked in the past, it became this non-political platform. It wasn't about Microsoft. It wasn't about Mac. It wasn't about Java or whatever. This was a place where politics was put aside. And so with that acquisition of Microsoft buying Yammer, there was a lot of people who kind of questioned that. What's going to happen? And what's exciting is that Microsoft announced that within that year, post the acquisition, that they saw a 55% increase in users adopting Yammer. And on top of that, you could say that Microsoft's definitely been embracing Yammer as it's reduced the licensing requirements and given it away in cases of Office 365 and education and some of these things.
Okay. And so kind of further to that is this idea that social technologies yield a 30% improvement in bringing a product or service to market. So this is a pretty impressive statistic. If you were to able to achieve this and measure it, it would be great. But could you give us some idea of how this could help foster and how organizations can help get to this type of productivity gain?
I really do see this as one of the key things that organizations need to start understanding is it's not just a matter of creating this place where there's conversations that happen. It's really about how can you really leverage these technologies to to increase communication and to be more agile. I love the quote, fail faster. You know, it's like, how can we, when we make a mistake, we can recognize that mistake much quicker so that we can progress faster. You know, you think about Einstein trying to figure out, not Einstein, but Thomas Edison with his light bulb thing, and we could debate about him versus his competitors, but the idea of how many light bulbs he had to try before he got one that worked. It's a fascinating thing of, you know, if it took 1,000 of them, the quicker he could make them and try them, the quicker he could bring his product to market. And it's fail faster, but it's also succeed faster and bring your product to market, and being able to get feedback with tons of transparency, where the support folks can be communicating issues, the sales team can be saying what the customers need, and it can definitely, in a good way, influence what happens with development of a product.
So we're also getting some questions on content location and how do you find content. So here's one question. Can you address content location exhaustion? It's getting harder for users to find content or threads if they don't know exactly where they originated. For instance, a search on your intranet for a discussion on a smart card rollout won't return a Yammer discussion on this topic.
That's a great question, a great point, and I would say in many organizations that search federation is something that's addressed through the Yammer web parts, where results would be returned not only from the intranet and the file shares and SharePoint and Exchange, public folders, or whatever it's indexing, but also in addition to that, Yammer results being able to come up, and if there's certain Twitter feeds and so on that need to be indexed, a lot of people, there are these abilities to integrate to create more of a unified search infrastructure. And so the Yammer web parts, I would say, can definitely help you out in that search perspective. But as well, let me address that same problem of discoverability. If I write a doc, and I put a lot of time into that, and it's 10 layers deep in some team site, that is where our docs for our team are, but I really would love to get feedback from the enterprise. How great would it be if I had a platform where I could say, hey, just put this together, love to get your feedback, and now I've been able to share that document, and it could even be a link to the document if the security is correct, where people can then, even with Office web apps and where we're going in the roadmap, be able to quickly view that document and provide their feedback right in line in that same conversation. And from an email perspective, that's so much harder. If I try and send a mail out to my team and say, hey, I just uploaded this doc, they really don't even want to see that email. They're like, well, if we care, we'll set up alerts and so on, you know. So as an employee, I'm going to be more productive if I can get quicker feedback, and if I know that I'm getting confirmation that people are liking what I'm doing.
Okay, so we also have another question on how do you deal with wildly negative posts in an ESN? Do you just remove them?
So that's a great question as well. First off, I think that what you want to have is a solid policy that will back you up if you do need to delete it, because there is such a thing as inappropriate posts. And that's the same on whether it's in SharePoint in a discussion or whether it's an image somebody adds to their profile. You know, these things are not necessarily new, but from the fact that it's going out to the entire enterprise, that may be new to some organizations. But the idea of having a policy that helps protect can definitely help in providing feedback there. I would say there's a tone in Enterprise Social Network that provides some level of trust, some level of your ability to ask questions. But in your policy as well, you can say constructive feedback is what we're looking for. You know, being able to share things of a certain nature, As well, when people first join, encouraging them to, to navigate around and get to know the environment before they just start spouting off, not realizing that even the CEO can be reading what's happening.
Okay,
one quick last thing is, I would say a lot of people are worried about there being a huge volume of that, and in my experience, so I've managed a couple different networks, and the network I've been working with now has nearly 5,000 people, and we've been running for over a year and a half. It's SPM, the SharePoint Yammer community, and on there we've had to delete less than 5 messages on there.
So that's
I've
very
done the same from other enterprises as well, where it's a handful. It's not a huge amount that they've had to deal with.
Yeah, I think people also have to realize social responsibility within the workplace as well.
Yep.
So while Joel was giving us his answer to the last question, I released another poll about which enterprise social platform you're looking to use or are currently using. And so if we could just take another few minutes and feel free to give us your feedback and where you're looking to go. And so obviously this feedback is important for us so that we can be sure to make sure that we're getting you the type of information that you are looking for. So I do have a question for you, Joel, around, while you release an ESN and folks are starting to adopt it, but the behavior within the ESN starts to mimic email, so one-to-one conversations. Are there any strategies that you can suggest to try to get users to become more transparent? Because that might be some change management in leveraging the technology.
Yeah, what I've found is there's going to be people that are only going to lurk until they're comfortable with it. And they're not going to get comfortable with it until they see their boss use it or until they see executives get involved. Because they don't know whether it's endorsed, they don't know at what level these conversations, they may be used to forums and asking a direct question, but not necessarily being able to share ideas. And so from my perspective, it's you want to kind of foster relationships with people across the business in all lines of business and build up these ambassadors for your social platform who can encourage people in good behavior, and as well getting executives involved that are willing to do these kind of fireside chats, Q&A and that kind of thing, where they become more personable. Somebody was talking recently about how enterprise social really allows you to do, there's that TV show about the boss who visits, they go and they go undercover boss, that's what it is. I was going to say they go undercover. The undercover boss, if you think about it, now with social, you've got that ability for people to kind of go undercover. They're really able to connect with people that otherwise they would, and probably not talk to them on the street. And now there's forums and that ability to connect with employees, and it creates a great example.
So I'm sharing right now the results of our last poll, and it seems like an overwhelming majority of you on the call are using or looking to use Yammer. So Chatter, a distant second, and then Jive and IBM Connections. So we always find it interesting to see what people are exploring. So
yeah,
next we're going to...
It's really fascinating. I find that even within different departments, there's some that gravitate, like sales may gravitate toward Chatter because of the use of Salesforce and so on.
So now we're kind of transitioning more towards some of these examples that you can get from success.yammer.com. But as a transition into these slides, Joel, can you tell us how we can measure success if you use Yammer for social technology, or I guess any technology for that matter, but since we're looking at Yammer?
So repeat your question. I kind of missed that one.
How can you measure success?
Measuring success. I do love this map that's from Yammer. This idea that it really comes down to what do you want to accomplish? What kind of behavior are you trying to influence or change? Whether it's sharing ideas or whether you're trying to, maybe it is trying to get a product quicker to market. I went to a working social tour up in New York, and the Pfizer guy, he basically reinforced that social helps his company bring products faster to market. And I think his stat was even 30%. So it's pretty reinforcing from that perspective. But I think it has a lot to do with what is the value? What is it you're trying to do? Are you trying to improve product quality? Are you trying to create more loyalty across your employees? And if you run through this this step-by-step process, it really gives you a lot of ideas of things to focus on. But it comes a lot from your business, your perspective of how do you want to use this transforming technology that allows people to collaborate better and kind of removes a lot of the barriers that otherwise would exist.
And so can you talk us through selecting a couple of goals that are most important to you and how this might fit in with the social maturity spectrum?
I really do see this as good examples of, you get your detractors, the people who are out there saying, really, you just want to waste time, do we really need a Facebook at work? But when you start reading through this, it really gives you some ideas of how can we create a baseline? How can we measure some of this to discover that it is making a difference? Whether it's creating cross-group collaboration, or whether it's helping company communication. What's fascinating to me is I was in one company where corporate communications, when we first started talking about enterprise social, they're like, you're going to put us out of business. If everybody can share the information, then they're not going to expect to hear it from corporate communication. And while I thought that was kind of a fascinating comment, I saw it as, well, they don't really see the full vision. Yes, a lot of people are going to be able to share things, and knowledge is going to be able to share it a lot faster, but it's also a tool that corporate communications should be able to get behind to make official announcements and to actually get feedback a lot faster on those announcements if they need to make changes. It's a big deal. It really can change and influence the way people work. And that's really what you want to do, is try to understand this transformation that can happen. What are some examples of those? What are some of our own goals? I would say most companies of the enterprise level do want to collaborate more across departments and geographies. Everybody wants to have more efficient projects. Everybody wants to be able to get their products to market faster. I mean, that's millions of dollars in some cases, maybe even billions in some of these larger enterprises. But at the same time, I've heard a small company, 5 people, 3 people, and they say, why do we care about using something like Yammer, an enterprise social network? And I say, well, how much of that knowledge is lost just because you can talk to somebody, because they're there? That knowledge is lost. And if you're doing it, I've recently started doing some collaboration with a couple friends on Bitcoin, and it filled my inbox. Trying to keep up with the conversations, it almost is like they're using email for chat. And if I could get those conversations happening in Yammer, then I could search across them. Anytime I want to go back to them, I can. But otherwise, my mail is getting lost in chat over email. Email is becoming less and less efficient in terms of what my needs are. even in a small company.
So this is really a good place to start and trying to brainstorm ideas, even if you're in the experimenting phase, to start creating that baseline.
Definitely agree. And it is going to be different from organization to organization. And while there's tools like ViewDo Labs, the Viewpoint, that would allow you to see adoption metrics and be able to see leaderboards and how people are connected and things like that, it's not until they really start digging in and saying, what do we want to focus on? Is it quality? Is it retention? And then start to measure those types of things as you're rolling out your network and saying, is it getting better? Because it's tough. There's so many changing things that happen that you do need to kind of establish, is it this that's making the difference? And so it may take some quantitative but also some qualitative data to help figure out what is making a difference to employee retention or quality of products or getting things to market faster.
Okay, so we're going to change the shift the conversation somewhat into how it all fits together. How do you build your social architecture? And so we did touch a bit on this in a couple of the earlier questions, but perhaps you could talk to us a little bit more about enterprise collaboration and where social fits in.
Yeah, and I felt a little bit guilty when we were asking people what platform they're using for social, and we didn't have SharePoint in that list. My bad. We didn't include any of the add-ons that people are using. I really do feel like
there were a couple. Yeah, there were a couple that we didn't mention, and so that's a little short-sightedness on our part. So feel free to continue chatting with us using Portal View on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people that are out there. You know, that conversation about SharePoint 2013 and social. I think that the question gets harder once you've rolled out SharePoint 2013, and I see it from this perspective of in the SharePoint world, it's about structured content, it's about control, it's about compliance. We need to make sure those documents that go in there are finding their way and are being published in the proper way. You know, whether it's draft and check-in, check-out, meta tags and these types of things. SharePoint really has its strengths in that structured world of being able to have workflow. And while in the past we kind of saw this as being in both worlds, both camps, I'm seeing people who are saying, you know, there's a lot of team sites here that we really don't even need. It's a handful of documents. And so as we see Yammer as being this place for more ad hoc collaboration for a team, being able to share a handful of documents, but about that structured world being more about SharePoint, Yammer being about this creative control and about trust. And you will find, for the most part, Yammer really is about, it's a tool that you can leverage, and it's less about the technology and more about the culture and how you use it and leverage it. SharePoint, on the other hand, it's a set of tools that you do need to tweak and you do need to kind of work with to build your templates around, and you do need to kind of figure out your workflow and your forms and trying to capture and organize and sort data and display it in different ways. Much less so in Yammer, where it really is designed to be very, very simple and designed for the least common denominator. But there's that word trust, and I think that's really important, is that SharePoint is more about that governance control, and the governance in Yammer is more about trust but verify with your ambassadors and people who can tap in and understand the conversations that are going on.
Okay, and then could you talk us through about, so people are trying to decide what they should move to the cloud, should they move to the cloud? Yammer is a cloud-based product. So can you talk us through the enterprise IA of on-prem versus cloud versus hybrid?
Yes, definitely. And I think that a lot of people are going to say hybrid is a reality, and that's definitely for sure. There's a lot of hybrid. There's going to be even more hybrid as people start to move things out. And what I've done in this little diagram here is to help people understand, yes, you could build your intranet in Office 365. For the most part, I see that as one of the last things that goes because of a lot of the customization that happens around search and news and navigation and really being able to control the look and feel and building apps and so on that are not just client apps but actual server apps that are pulling in business data into these portals. In this example, I'm saying if somebody's really drinking the Kool-Aid, they may be a small, medium business, and they're like, we want to go all cloud. We're all in. You can do that by being able to leverage Office 365 and building your hierarchies and building your structure across the structured cloud. And you've got to set up rules between when to use a Yammer group versus a team site and so on for the unstructured collaboration. But I was trying to just use that example of, I love the example that SkyDrive Pro in the cloud is better than yours. What Microsoft has been doing with SkyDrive Pro as an example, their deployment is better than anyone else's in the entire world because of the quotas they give you, because of the external sharing capabilities they've added onto it with being able to share over email and some of those types of things that I haven't seen, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I have not seen any single deployment of SkyDrive Pro that's not better than Microsoft's. And that may be a bold statement, but who else can do 100 gigs SkyDrive Pro for users who need it? That's a big deal.
Okay, and then a more of a on-prem approach?
Yeah, so there's going to be companies that they approach it from, we've got SharePoint on-premise and the data that's in there, we really need to keep on-premise. But there are some conversations and some lightweight collaboration that's not, there's not a lot of PII data. In fact, we want to keep that on-premise. But we want to put our toe in the water. We want to start having some of our conversations in Yammer and being able to leverage that technology, whether it's inside and outside of the corporation. For example, partner extranets and customer connections and things like that. There's a lot of things you can leverage from those external networks that Yammer provides. But from the same understanding, it really is lightweight branding. There's not any kind of heavy customization going on here. The apps really are following the app model that's supported in the cloud.
And then finally, the hybrid example.
Yeah, in that hybrid example, it's really, let's take advantage of what's easy in the cloud, and then we know there's going to be some stuff we want to hold back. Let's keep our intranet on-premise for our search infrastructure, where our highly structured content and collaboration happens from a, but our team sites and the stuff that's really, I like to say commodity, that stuff that's in SharePoint that's a commodity that it's really just create a new widget. Let's let Microsoft handle that in Office 365. But let's, those highly customized apps and portals where we're doing a lot of integration and sensitive data and things that we really never want to put in Microsoft's data center, it's another conversation. And as well, this doesn't necessarily address the private public cloud, but you may do the same kind of thing where we say, this is what's in the hosted data center, but those lines around the intranet versus the departmental content versus vanilla team sites and vanilla, the SkyDrive Pro, and so on, you really start to say, back in the day I used to say, there's chocolate and there's vanilla. The stuff that's vanilla, we really need to just keep it on its own farm because it's stuff that eventually can go into the cloud. The stuff that's more highly customized, needs more integration, stuff where we need to touch it a lot more, we need to keep some of that back. It's going to stay hybrid for a while until we've got that level of trust with Microsoft or whoever's data center we care to move it into. And the great news is on-premise is not going away.
That is good news. I am sure there are a lot of folks who are happy, very happy about that. Yeah. So with that, we've kind of hit the top of the hour. And I took a look that we've gotten a lot of great comments on and some feedback on through hashtag #PortalView. So please check it out to keep the dialogue going. We do want to highlight a couple of upcoming webinars that we have running. One focusing on mobile, the power of SharePoint in the palm of your hand. That will be next week. And then the first week in February, we will have the first in a 6-part series around, around social enterprise. So this first one will be how best to utilize instant messaging and unified communications. And so then you'll see in March 4th, we'll have the second webinar in that series, and that will continue on until about June or so. So please stay tuned. We have a lot more conversations to have around social enterprise and how best to leverage SharePoint and Yammer to facilitate those conversations. So with that, I just want to say a big thank you to Joel for your time today and for sharing such great information with us and your thoughts on how groups, how organizations can start moving through their social journeys. So with that, thank you very much. And Joel, if you have any closing words, I'll let you share.
Sure. I appreciate everybody who's been able to join us today. And I'm definitely excited about the momentum. You know, there's so many people that are experimenting with this technology that it's going to be exciting this next year around being able to take that momentum and being able to share best practices. And I hope to see more and more people sharing what they're learning, either through blogging or Twitter or in the Yammer network. It's Yammer /SPYAM, SPYAM. We have that's where we have over nearly 5,000 people that are really, you know, top members of our community that share information. It'd be great to have you guys join us there. I'm happy to prove anybody's request to get an invite into that network.
Could you share that out on Twitter for us at PortalView?
Definitely will. Yep.
Great. All right. Well, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for your contributions, your participation, and for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.